This week's parsha sees the birth of the 11 sons together with Dinah, but the 11 sons of Yaakov, the 12th to be born next week, is the Shiftei Kor, the tribes of the Jewish people. Throughout this period of time, 20 years, Yaakov has found himself in the midst and working together with Lavan Harami, Lavan the deceitful one, the cunning one. He works for 7 years for Rachel. There's the switch and it's Leah. Works for further 7 years in order to be able to marry Rachel. And finally he works for a further 6 years for his own personal benefit. And at a certain point, he decides enough is enough and he wants to return home. What is that point? Well, the Torah tells us as follows. Vayihi, and it was kasher yalda Rachel et Yosef. When Rachel gave birth to Joseph, her first of 2 sons. Vayome Yaakov el Lavan. At this point in time, Yaakov says to Lavan, Shalcheni, please send me. Ve'elcha el mukomi va'artzi, and I will go back to my place, to my land. I'll go to my birthright. Rashi comments, why all of a sudden? What occurred at this point in time that essentially caused Yaakov to catch and to say, now's time to go home? So he says as follows, Mishenolad sitno shel Esav. The whole reason why Yaakov Avinu fled the land of Israel, he leaves his parents, was because he was afraid for his life. He had received the brachas, the blessings from his father Yitzchak instead of Esav. And when Esav found out that he had been deprived of these blessings, he was intent and determined to kill his brother Yaakov. And Yaakov therefore has to flee for his life. And he remains in the sanctuary and the safety of being with Lavan for so long as he felt a threat that his life was at jeopardy. And something happens, something occurs after these 20 years that makes Yaakov feel now that he is safe to come back. What was it? Well, clearly from the sequence of events, the birth of Yosef seems to indicate to Yaakov now he can go. And in fact, that's what Rashi comments, Mishenolad sitno shel Esav, from the time that the antidote, that the remedy to Esav was born, namely Yosef, now he feels comfortable to come back. And Rashi gives an analogy, and he says Esav can be compared to straw, and Yosef can be compared to a flame. And we all know that when a flame attacks straw, it totally consumes it. And therefore, Yaakov Avinu sensed that when the flame of Yosef was born, his sanctuary, his protection against his brother Esav was now guaranteed, even in close proximity. And we have to understand it on a slightly different level. You know, I've mentioned in the thought for the week that I sent out that I've just come back from the annual Kinus HaShluchim, the gathering of emissaries of the Lubavitcher Rebbe from around the world. 3,500 rabbis joined together over 3 days to involve ourselves in seminar, fabrengen, inspiration, upliftment, camaraderie, to bring a sense of purpose and of mission once again, after a year, sometimes in cases even longer than that, of being in the field, so to speak. We come together to get that injection of inspiration from Sheves Achim Gam Yachad, from brothers sitting together, conversing, inspiring, relating, and just simply reigniting friendships and relationships. The Kinus has been going for many years. But there was a time where it was felt that this whole concept of shlichus, of sending people away, was doomed to fail. And that was the time when the Lubavitcher Rebbe unfortunately passed away. There was a tremendous sense that the demise had finally come into play. And yet, that wasn't the case. In fact, more people, more young couples have gone out on shlichus, to go out and to involve themselves in the broader Jewish community since the demise, the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe than had previously. In the past 10, now 15 years, more people were sent away than in the preceding 40 years. What is the nature of this inspiration? What is the nature of this force? Well, it's this week's parsha. The word Esav in Hebrew has the same makeup of the letters asu, what has already been accomplished, what's already been achieved. Esav represents that aspect which tells us to look back at what we've accomplished and to be content with what we have achieved. To look back at the tremendous strides we have taken in our personal lives. When a person makes a stride from not keeping kosher to keeping kosher, they can look back and say, look at what I have accomplished. Look at the changes that I have effected in my life. When a person chooses to embrace Shabbos in its sanctity, and it changes their lives, they can sit back and say, look at what I've accomplished. I'm no longer at the theater. I'm no longer at the mall. I'm no longer on the golf course on Shabbos, but rather I'm in shul. I'm celebrating it. I'm experiencing it with my family. I'm experiencing a spiritual upliftment. And a person, no matter what we've accomplished and what we've achieved, runs the risk of looking back and saying, wow, look at where I've come from. Look at what I've achieved. Look at what I have accomplished. And a person under those conditions could ultimately end up feeling very contented with themselves, very pleased, and say, you know what, I've made such tremendous strides that really in truth, I don't need to move forward anymore. That's Esav, Asu, looking back at what we've accomplished. Yosef, the word Yosef means to add. And therefore, with the birth of Yosef, Yaakov Avinu realizes that that malady of contentment of accomplishment, of being satisfied with what one has achieved, which is the earmark and the hallmark of Esav, now the antidote had been born. A person was born whose life was an expression of Yosef, of doing more, of increasing, of no matter what we accomplish and what we achieve, more needs to be done, more needs to be accomplished, and more needs to be achieved. And therefore Yaakov Avinu recognizes that with this child, the remedy to the malady of Esav has finally come into effect. That concept of satisfaction, of sense of accomplishment, whilst it must exist, must never exist so powerfully that it hinders future growth. And Yosef tells us, remember Asu, don't forget what you've achieved. Don't undermine what you've accomplished. But never forget, Yosef, to add. And that concept of adding is the inspiration which I received this past few days when I was with my brothers, as we were all celebrating the work that we have achieved and giving ourselves a sense of urgency of what yet still needs to be accomplished, of what more still needs to be done. The Yosef, 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 to do, add, and more and more and more. And that's why, yes, with the tragic passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1994, there was that perception that perhaps the end is near. But because it wasn't a question of what was achieved, but what is yet to be achieved, the concept of Yosef kicked into play, and as a result, there's been a burgeoning and a greater growth in the Jewish world than perhaps ever before. Let's take the message of Yosef into our own personal lives. Give yourselves and ourselves a pat on the back for what we've done, but never be satisfied, and always recognize that we have to add and increase every single day. Good Shabbos.